I'm Jay, 32 years old, and I still remember the day my parents handed over our $900,000 family home to my sister Ashley without a second thought. 5 generations of memories, gone with a signature. When they announced it at dinner, everyone waited for my explosion of anger. Instead, I just smiled. What they didn't know was that my smile wasn't acceptance. It was the beginning of a plan already in motion. Before I tell you how I turned this betrayal around, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you want more real stories about family justice and standing up for yourself. My family always seemed normal from the outside. My father, Richard, was a high school physics teacher who loved explaining how the world worked to anyone who would listen. My mother, Deborah, taught 4th grade at the local elementary school, with a patience that made her beloved by students and parents alike. Together they raised Ashley and me in our beautiful colonial-style home in a quiet suburb just outside of Boston. This wasn't just any house. My grandfather built it with his own hands in the 1950s, pouring his heart into every detail from the hand-carved banister to the stone fireplace in the living room. He passed it down to my father, with the understanding it would continue moving through generations. The house had seen 5 decades of Christmases, birthdays, and family gatherings. Beyond its emotional value, the neighborhood had developed around it, turning what was once a modest family home into a property worth nearly $1 million. From my earliest memories, the difference in how my parents treated Ashley and me was subtle but unmistakable. When I needed new shoes for basketball, I got the discount brand. When Ashley wanted riding lessons, they found the money. When I earned a B+ on a difficult test, they nodded with approval. When Ashley managed a C-, they celebrated with ice cream. The pattern was consistent and clear. "Your sister needs more encouragement," Mom would explain when I questioned the disparity. "She's more sensitive than you are." Dad would reinforce this with his own justification. "You've always been strong, Jay. Ashley needs more support to find her way." By 16, I was working at the local hardware store after school, and on weekends, saving for college and buying my own clothes. Meanwhile, Ashley received a car for her 16th birthday. Not new, but certainly not the nothing I had received. I didn't complain much. I was learning valuable lessons about work ethic and independence that would serve me well later. After high school, I earned a partial scholarship to a well-regarded business school. It covered about half my tuition, and I worked 2 jobs to make up the difference, graduating with minimal debt and a degree in finance with a focus on real estate markets. My first job wasn't glamorous, assistant to a property manager for a small real estate firm, but it was a foot in the door. I watched, listened, and learned everything I could. I stayed late to review contracts, volunteered for difficult clients, and slowly built a reputation for reliability and sharp insight. Within 5 years, I had moved to a larger firm, negotiating commercial leases and property acquisitions. By 30, I had a comfortable savings account, a growing investment portfolio, and the respect of my peers in the industry. Ashley took a different path. She started college as a psychology major, then switched to communications, then business, then art history. Each change required new textbooks, and often meant lost credits. My parents covered her tuition without complaint, semester after semester. After 6 years, she graduated with a general studies degree and moved back home. Her first job was as a receptionist at a doctor's office, which she quit after 3 months because the doctor was creepy. Next came a position at a clothing boutique, which ended when the store closed. A stint as an administrative assistant lasted slightly longer, about 6 months, before she decided the work was beneath her talents. Between jobs, she relied on our parents for rent, car payments, and daily expenses. They never refused, dipping into their retirement savings when necessary. "Just until she finds her footing," they would say. At 27, Ashley met Marcus at a friend's party. He worked sporadically as a freelance graphic designer but spent more time talking about his potential projects than actually completing them. Within a year, they were married in an elaborate ceremony that, yes, our parents paid for. Marcus moved into our family home with Ashley, paying nominal rent that I later learned often went unpaid. Their first child arrived 11 months after the wedding, followed by a second 18 months later. With 2 small children, Ashley declared that being a full-time mother was her new career, and Marcus continued his pattern of almost employment. My parents, now in their early 60s, delayed retirement to help support the growing family under their roof. Through all of this, I maintained a cordial relationship with everyone. I visited for holidays, brought gifts for the kids, and kept my observations to myself. I had long ago accepted that this was simply how our family functioned, and I had built my life accordingly. I took pride in my self-sufficiency and focused on my growing success in the real estate world. If I occasionally felt a sting when hearing about another bill my parents had covered for Ashley, I kept it to myself. What none of them realized was how carefully I was watching, learning, and planning for a future they couldn't imagine. The first sign that something significant was changing came on a crisp Sunday in October. I received a text from my father asking if I could come to the house for a family discussion that evening. The formal phrasing was unusual. Normally, invitations were casual calls from Mom about Sunday dinner. This had a different tone entirely. I arrived to find my mother setting out coffee and pie in the dining room rather than the kitchen where we usually gathered. Ashley and Marcus were already seated, Ashley practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. Marcus had a smug smile that immediately put me on edge. My parents, by contrast, looked tense. Dad kept adjusting his glasses, a nervous habit from his teaching days, while Mom fussed with the arrangement of dessert plates that were already perfectly aligned. Now that everyone's here, my father began after I took my seat. Your mother and I want to discuss something important with both of you. He cleared his throat and continued, We've been thinking about the future, about what happens to this house, and how we can best provide for the next generation. My mother jumped in, her words coming quickly. We're not getting any younger, and we want to make sure everything's properly arranged while we're still. Well, while we can still make these decisions ourselves. Something in the way she avoided looking directly at me sent a warning signal through my body. Ashley reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it tightly. We've decided that the most sensible approach is to transfer ownership of the house before it becomes complicated by estate issues, my father said. What Dad means, Ashley interjected, unable to contain herself any longer, is that they're signing the house over to us. Isn't that wonderful? The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed her words. I looked to my parents for clarification, hoping I had misunderstood. We think it makes the most sense, my mother said softly, still not meeting my eyes. Ashley and the children are living here already. It simplifies everything. And what about Jay? Marcus asked with false concern that barely masked his triumph. Surely he gets something equivalent. My father shifted uncomfortably. Jay is very successful in his own right. He has a lovely apartment and his career. Ashley has the children to consider. I sat silently, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. This wasn't just about a house. It was about generations of family history, about belonging, about worth. And apparently, I had been judged and found irrelevant. After the initial announcement, I excused myself to get some air, stepping onto the back porch where I'd spent countless summer evenings as a child. My father followed a few minutes later, his expression troubled. I know this might seem unfair at first glance, he began. At first glance? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. He sighed heavily. Your mother and I have always worried about Ashley. She's never had your drive, your independence. The children need stability, and she and Marcus. Well, they need help that you don't. So I'm being penalized for being responsible, I said quietly. Not penalized, he protested. We're just allocating resources where they're most needed. You've made us so proud with how well you've done for yourself. You don't need our help. And the family history in this house? Grandpa built it for all of us, for the whole family line. He looked away. Ashley will keep it in the family. Her children will grow up here. I wanted to argue, to remind him of all the summers I'd helped him repair the roof, paint the shutters, maintain the very house he was now giving away. I wanted to point out that rewarding Ashley's dependency would only ensure it continued. Most of all, I wanted him to acknowledge the unfairness of it all. Instead, I nodded slowly. I understand. And I did understand, more clearly than ever before. I understood that in their eyes my success had made me dispensable. I understood that no matter what I achieved, Ashley would always be the priority. I understood that fairness and recognition weren't values my parents truly held. Most importantly, I understood that it was time to take control of the narrative myself. That night, driving back to my apartment, I felt the initial shock giving way to a complex mix of emotions. The hurt was profound, not just from the loss of the house, but from the casual way they had dismissed my place in the family's future. There was anger, too, bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to erupt into words I might regret. But as I drove, another feeling began to emerge. It wasn't acceptance, as my parents might have hoped. It was determination. I was a professional in real estate development, after all. I understood property values, market trends, and strategic investments better than anyone in my family. If they were going to make business decisions, perhaps it was time I did the same. By the time I reached my apartment, the first outlines of a plan were taking shape in my mind. I wouldn't fight their decision directly. I wouldn't plead or argue for what should have been rightfully shared. Instead, I would use the very skills I'd developed without their support to create a solution they hadn't anticipated. I poured myself a glass of scotch and opened my laptop. It was time to research the current development plans for the neighborhood around my childhood home. The quiet glow of my laptop illuminated my living room as I began researching property values around my parents' neighborhood. What I discovered surprised even me. While the area had always been respectable, recent zoning changes had opened the door for significant development. 3 blocks away, permits had been filed for a luxury condominium complex. The city council had approved plans for improving the nearby park. A boutique shopping center was in early development stages just a mile down the main road. These changes hadn't yet affected property values. They were still in the planning stages, not widely publicized. But as someone in the industry, I recognized the pattern. In 18 to 24 months, property values would likely increase by 40 to 60%, possibly more. The $900,000 family home could easily be worth $1.5 million, perhaps even $2 million. I wondered if Ashley or my parents had any idea about these developments. Given their reaction to the current value, I doubted they understood what was coming. They were giving away much more than they realized. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. Instead of going to the office, I drove to the construction site of the new condominium complex. The foreman directed me to the on-site trailer, serving as a temporary office, where I introduced myself to a man reviewing blueprints. "I'm looking for whoever's in charge of this development," I explained. The man looked up, assessing me with shrewd eyes. "That would be me, Albert Kingsley, Kingsley Development Group. What can I do for you?" Over the next hour, Albert and I discussed the neighborhood's potential. He confirmed my suspicions about the coming boom and seemed impressed by my knowledge of the local real estate market. When I mentioned my family home was just blocks away, his interest visibly increased. "That's prime location," he noted. "Those established properties with character will be gold when our complex is finished. We've actually been trying to acquire more of the surrounding parcels, but most owners don't want to sell. They don't understand what's coming." A thought began to form, not fully developed but intriguing. What if I could help with that? I have connections in the neighborhood. It wasn't exactly true, but it could be. Albert raised an eyebrow. "I'd be very interested in that kind of partnership. Are you looking to make a career change, perhaps?" I smiled. Maybe not a change so much as an evolution. By the end of our meeting, we had exchanged contact information and arranged to meet again later that week. As I walked back to my car, my mind was racing with possibilities. I had entered that trailer looking for information, but I was leaving with the beginnings of an opportunity. That evening, I made another crucial decision. I contacted a mortgage broker I had worked with professionally and inquired about my financing options. My credit was excellent, and I had a substantial amount saved for a down payment on a property of my own. Within days, I had pre-approval for a loan that would allow me to purchase one of the luxury units in Albert's new development. Not the largest, but a respectable 2-bedroom with high-end finishes. My next step was more delicate. Using industry contacts and research tools not available to the general public, I began identifying property owners in the blocks surrounding my family home. Many were longtime residents like my parents, people who had lived there for decades. Others were more recent arrivals, who had recognized the neighborhood's potential before most. I created a detailed map, noting ownership, approximate property values, and any relevant details I could gather. With this information in hand, I registered a new LLC, Legacy Investment Group. The name was intentional, a small, private acknowledgement of what had been taken from me. Through this entity, I began making discreet inquiries about purchasing properties in the neighborhood. My approach was careful and methodical. I didn't rush or make obvious moves that might attract attention. For some properties, I simply expressed interest and opened communication channels for future discussions. For others, where owners were already considering selling, I made fair offers slightly above market value, enough to be attractive, but not so high as to seem suspicious. Within a month, I had secured purchase agreements on 2 adjacent properties and had promising discussions with 3 other owners. None of these transactions would be finalized for months, but the groundwork was being laid. Simultaneously, I proceeded with the purchase of my condominium unit in Albert's development. As one of the early buyers, I was able to select a prime location with an excellent view. More importantly, my early commitment gave me leverage in my growing relationship with Albert and his development company. During our follow-up meetings, I shared my vision for a more comprehensive approach to neighborhood development, not just the condominium complex, but a cohesive community with controlled access, shared amenities, and integrated security. Albert was intrigued, particularly when I explained how this approach could significantly increase property values and attract a more affluent demographic. "You're talking about essentially creating a gated community within an established neighborhood," he observed during one of our discussions. "That's ambitious. Some residents might resist." "Some might," I agreed. "But others will recognize the value it adds to their properties. And once the process begins, those who resist will find themselves increasingly isolated." Albert studied me with newfound respect. "You know, when you first walked into my office, I thought you were just another local resident worried about construction noise. I underestimated you." I smiled. Most people do. As my plan took shape, I was careful to maintain my normal routine. I continued performing excellently at my day job, joined family dinners when invited, and never mentioned my new investment activities to anyone. When my parents or Ashley brought up the house transfer, I responded with calm acceptance, sometimes even offering advice on property maintenance or tax implications. If they noticed anything different about me, they attributed it to my coming to terms with their decision. In reality, each conversation was an opportunity to gather more information about their plans and timeline, which I could then incorporate into my own strategy. By the end of the 3rd month, Legacy Investment Group had secured commitments on 5 strategic properties surrounding my family home, and I had finalized the purchase of my condominium unit. I had also hired a small but efficient staff for Legacy, a property manager with experience in high-end developments, a security consultant who had previously worked with gated communities, and a marketing specialist focusing on luxury real estate. None of them knew my personal connection to the neighborhood we were targeting. To them, I was simply an investor who had identified an emerging opportunity in a transitioning area. And in many ways, that was exactly what I had become. The day of the official property transfer arrived 6 months after the initial announcement. My parents had selected a prestigious law firm downtown, wanting to ensure everything was handled properly. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit that projected professional confidence rather than the emotional turmoil I still felt beneath the surface. The reception area of Peterson, Blackwell, and Associates exuded old-money Boston elegance, with leather chairs, mahogany paneling, and discreet lighting. I exchanged pleasantries with the receptionist and took a seat, reviewing emails on my phone while I waited for the others. Legacy Investment Group had just closed on our 6th property acquisition, and the security infrastructure planning was proceeding on schedule. Everything was aligning perfectly. Ashley and Marcus arrived next, both dressed more formally than I had seen them in years. Ashley wore a floral dress that strained slightly at the seams, while Marcus had managed to find a tie to accompany his one decent blazer. They seemed surprised to see me already there. "Jay, you came early," Ashley remarked, a hint of suspicion in her voice. Perhaps she had expected me to back out or make a last-minute scene. "Of course," I replied calmly. "This is an important day for the family." Marcus eyed me warily. "We thought you might still be upset about the arrangement." I offered a smile that revealed nothing. "It's not about what I want. It's about what's best for everyone." My parents arrived last, looking uncomfortable in their formal attire. My father kept tugging at his collar, while my mother clutched her purse with white knuckles. They greeted me with uncertain smiles, clearly relieved that I was behaving civilly, but still anticipating a potential outburst. The attorney, Bradley Peterson himself, ushered us into a conference room where documents were already arranged at each place. He explained the process with practiced efficiency, highlighting the key points of the property transfer. The house, valued at $900,000 according to a recent appraisal, would become the sole property of Ashley and Marcus. My parents would retain limited residency rights, allowing them to live in the house until they chose to move or were unable to live independently. As Peterson discussed the tax implications and future considerations, I noticed my parents repeatedly glancing in my direction, gauging my reaction. Ashley and Marcus, meanwhile, could barely contain their excitement, squeezing each other's hands and nodding enthusiastically at every point the lawyer made. When it came time for signatures, I watched in silence as pens moved across papers, transferring generations of family history with a few strokes of ink. When everyone had signed and the documents were being processed for filing, an expectant hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me, waiting for the reaction they still believed was coming. Instead, I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. "I think this calls for a celebration," I said, placing the bottle in the center of the table. "Congratulations, Ashley and Marcus. May your new home bring you as much joy as it has brought our family through the years." The tension in the room dissolved into confused relief. My father's shoulders relaxed visibly, and my mother's eyes welled with tears. Ashley looked momentarily disappointed, as if she had been looking forward to playing the victim if I had protested, but quickly recovered and accepted the expensive bottle with a gracious smile. "That's so thoughtful of you, Jay," she said. "I know this can't be easy. Life gives everyone what they truly deserve. Eventually," I replied, maintaining my smile. "I'm just glad to see everything working out as it should." After the meeting concluded, my mother pulled me aside in the hallway outside the conference room. Her eyes searched my face anxiously. "Are you really okay with all this, Jay?" she asked. "We worried so much about how you would take it." I took her hands in mine, noting how much older they seemed than just a year ago. "Mom, I understand why you and Dad made this decision. You've always worried more about Ashley, and that's not going to change now. I've built my own life, my own success. I don't need the house." "We've always been so proud of how independent you are," she said, squeezing my hands. "Ashley just needs more support than you ever did. The children need stability." I nodded. "I know, and I'm truly at peace with your decision. Everything will work out exactly as it should." She embraced me tightly, murmuring thanks for my understanding. Over her shoulder, I caught my father watching us, relief evident in his expression. He truly believed the potential crisis had been averted, that their golden child had received her inheritance without consequence, and that I had graciously stepped aside as I always had. Later that evening, I returned to my apartment and poured myself a glass of scotch. I opened my laptop and checked my emails. There was a message from Albert confirming that our application for expanded security measures in the neighborhood had been approved by the city council. Another from my property manager reporting that renovations on our recently acquired properties were proceeding on schedule. A third from the security consultant with proposed protocols for the neighborhood access points. I leaned back in my chair, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Everything was proceeding according to plan. In approximately 3 months, the first phase of our neighborhood enhancement program would begin. By then, Legacy Investment Group would control nearly 70% of the properties surrounding my parents' house, now Ashley's house. The feeling washing over me wasn't exactly satisfaction, and certainly not revenge. It was something more complex, the calm certainty of knowing that actions have consequences, and that those consequences were now inevitable. I had not created this situation. I had simply recognized its potential and positioned myself accordingly. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the future that none of them could yet see coming, but which I had carefully engineered. The chess pieces were all in position. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for the game to play out. Exactly 32 days after the property transfer was finalized, Legacy Investment Group issued its first press release. The announcement was strategically timed and carefully worded, revealing plans for the Enclave, a premium residential community incorporating the existing neighborhood structure with significant upgrades to security, landscaping, and community amenities. The local paper ran a modest article about the development, noting the substantial investment being made in what had previously been considered a pleasant but unremarkable neighborhood. What the article didn't mention, because no one had made the connection, was that the Enclave would effectively surround and incorporate the property recently transferred to Ashley and Marcus. 3 days after the announcement, Ashley called me, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Jay, have you heard about this new development in our neighborhood? The Enclave or something? The neighbors are all talking about it. They say property values might double in the next year." I maintained a carefully neutral tone. "I think I saw something about that. Sounds like a good thing for homeowners in the area." "It's amazing timing," she continued. "Mom and Dad just gave us the house, and now it might be worth way more than we thought. Marcus says we should thank our lucky stars." "Lucky indeed," I agreed. Timing is everything in real estate. What Ashley didn't know was that the first visible changes were already scheduled to begin the following week. The initial phase would appear harmless enough: landscape improvements to several properties nearby, the installation of decorative lampposts along the main streets, and subtle signage, indicating the boundaries of the Enclave community. The second phase, however, would be more noticeable. Security features would be implemented gradually: decorative fencing between properties that served a functional purpose, cameras disguised as architectural elements, and the first checkpoint at the eastern entrance to the neighborhood, the entrance furthest from Ashley's house, so as not to immediately raise concerns. As predicted, the first month of changes generated mostly positive reactions from residents. The improved landscaping and lighting enhanced the neighborhood's appearance, and property values began to tick upward almost immediately. A few residents expressed curiosity about the long-term plans, but most were pleased with the improvements to their community. During this period, I maintained my routine of occasional family visits. At Sunday dinner 6 weeks after the changes began, Ashley couldn't stop talking about the neighborhood improvements. "The new landscaping is gorgeous," she gushed. "And did you see they're putting in that cute little park area at the corner? The kids are going to love that." My father nodded approvingly. "The property values are already going up. The Hendersons down the street were told their home is worth 15% more than last year's assessment. It's certainly changing the character of the neighborhood," my mother added. "Though I'm not sure about all those new signs they're putting up. Seems a bit controlling." I kept my comments minimal and neutral, letting them talk through their observations without revealing my involvement. It was interesting to note that my mother had picked up on the subtle shift toward increased regulation of the community spaces, a harbinger of changes to come. The second phase began in the 7th week, with the installation of the first security checkpoint. Residents received official-looking notices explaining the new enhanced access protocol and providing instructions for registering their vehicles and obtaining entry passes for guests. The notice emphasized the security benefits and potential for increased property values, presenting the changes as exclusively positive. The first ripples of concern appeared shortly thereafter. At the next family dinner, Marcus brought up the checkpoint. "It's a bit much, don't you think? We had to register our cars and give them our work schedules, and now guests have to be pre-approved? It feels like we're living in some kind of compound." "I think it's great," Ashley countered. "The realtor from down the street says these security features could add another 10% to our home value. Besides, it makes me feel safer with the kids." My father seemed conflicted. "I understand the security benefits, but it did feel strange when I had to show ID to that guard yesterday. I've lived in this neighborhood for 30 years. Did you register as residents?" I asked innocently. The notice probably explained the process. "We did," my mother said. "But apparently as non-owners, we have different access privileges than Ashley and Marcus. The guard had to call for verification the first time we visited on our own." I nodded sympathetically while hiding my satisfaction. The system was working exactly as designed. The next phase would introduce more comprehensive restrictions, further differentiating between property owners and visitors. By the third month, the enclave had implemented its full security protocol. All 5 entrance points to the neighborhood now had checkpoints. Residents had been issued electronic passes for their vehicles. Visitor parking was restricted to designated areas, most of which were at the periphery of the community. Pedestrian access was controlled through gates requiring resident key cards. The changes were significant enough that they began to affect daily life in ways that couldn't be ignored. Ashley called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with frustration. The kids' playdate had to be canceled because Melissa's mother couldn't get through the security gate. Apparently, our guest allowance was already used up this week when Mom and Dad visited. "This is getting ridiculous." "That does sound frustrating," I commiserated. "Have you tried contacting the management company?" "Of course I have. They just keep referring to the community guidelines that everyone supposedly agreed to, but we never agreed to anything. This all just started happening around us." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while Ashley continued venting about the new restrictions, the parking limitations that made it difficult for Marcus's band members to visit for rehearsals, the landscaping requirements that prevented them from installing the trampoline the kids wanted, the noise regulations that had resulted in a warning when they had a backyard barbecue. What she couldn't know, was that each of these restrictions had been carefully calibrated to create maximum inconvenience while remaining legally defensible as reasonable community standards. The property owners who had sold to Legacy Investment Group had signed agreements allowing for these changes. Those who hadn't sold outright, like Ashley and Marcus, were now effectively surrounded by properties that had. The situation reached its first critical point on a Sunday afternoon when my parents arrived for their weekly dinner with Ashley's family. They pulled up to the main security checkpoint as usual, but this time, something was different. "I'm sorry, but your visitor privileges for this address have been temporarily suspended," the security guard informed them. "That's absurd," my father protested. "We're her parents. We have standing permission." The guard consulted his tablet. "According to our records, this residence has exceeded its visitor allocation for the month. You'll need the homeowners to file an exception request with the management office, which can be processed within 3 business days." "We've been coming here every Sunday for years," my mother exclaimed. "We lived in that house until a few months ago." "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but I have to follow the established protocols. Perhaps you could call the residents and ask them to come authorize your entry in person." My parents called Ashley, who arrived at the gate flustered and angry. After a heated exchange with the guard that accomplished nothing, she was forced to meet with her parents at a coffee shop outside the neighborhood instead. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. Ashley's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered with casual concern in my voice. "Hey, Ash, everything okay?" Her voice was tight with panic and fury. "No, everything is not okay. Mom and Dad were blocked from visiting their own home. Some security guard treated them like criminals. This whole enclave thing is out of control. You work in real estate. Can you help us figure out what's going on?" The moment I had been planning for had finally arrived. "That sounds terrible," I said, injecting genuine concern into my voice. "I have some contacts who might be able to help. Let me make some calls and see what I can find out about who's really behind all these changes." "Please do," she urged. "This is getting scary. It's like someone is trying to take over the entire neighborhood." I promised to look into it right away and arranged to meet her and the rest of the family the following evening to discuss what I discovered. As I ended the call, I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. The chess pieces had advanced exactly as planned, and it was nearly time for the final move. The next day, I arranged for Ashley, Marcus, and my parents to meet me at the Legacy Investment Group headquarters. I had selected the downtown office location specifically for its impressive views and unmistakable atmosphere of success and power. The 43rd floor suite featured floor-to-ceiling windows, custom walnut furnishings, and subtle lighting that highlighted the company logo prominently displayed behind the reception desk. I arrived early to brief my executive assistant, Sarah, about the incoming visitors. Their family friends seeking consultation about the enclave development, I explained, maintaining the pretense we had established with the staff. Please show them to the main conference room when they arrive, and make sure refreshments are available. Sarah nodded efficiently. Of course, Mr. Matthews. And the presentation materials you requested have been prepared. They're ready in the conference room. I thanked her and retreated to my office to review the documents one final time. Everything was in order. Property maps showing Legacy's holdings, legal agreements establishing the neighborhood regulations, financial projections, and the security protocols that had so disrupted my family's routine. I had also prepared a special proposal that would be revealed at precisely the right moment. At precisely 6 o'clock, Sarah buzzed to inform me that my guests had arrived. I instructed her to let them wait 5 minutes, a small but deliberate power move, before escorting them to the conference room. Through my office door, I could hear their surprised murmurs as they were led through the impressive space, clearly not expecting such a prestigious setting. When I entered the conference room, the confusion on their faces deepened. My mother was the first to speak. "Jay, what is this place? I thought we were meeting with your real estate contacts." I smiled as I took my position at the head of the conference table. "You are. Welcome to the headquarters of Legacy Investment Group. Please, take a seat. We have a lot to discuss." They exchanged bewildered glances as they settled into the leather chairs. Ashley looked around at the sleek, expensive surroundings, her expression cycling between confusion and dawning suspicion. "I don't understand," my father said. "What does this company have to do with our neighborhood problems?" Instead of answering directly, I pressed a button on the table console. The lights dimmed slightly, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. A detailed map of their neighborhood appeared, with color-coded properties highlighting different ownership categories. "Let me explain exactly what's happening in your neighborhood," I began, my voice taking on the professional tone I used for client presentations. Over the past 10 months, Legacy Investment Group has strategically acquired 73% of the properties surrounding your home. These acquisitions were made through various means: direct purchases, option agreements, and joint ventures with the original homeowners. Marcus leaned forward, his face darkening. "Are you saying this company is behind all the changes? The checkpoints, the restrictions, everything?" "That's correct," I confirmed. Legacy has implemented a comprehensive community enhancement program designed to significantly increase property values while creating an exclusive, secure environment for residents. "But that's exactly what's causing all our problems," Ashley exclaimed. "The security guards, the visitor restrictions, the ridiculous rules about everything from parking to lawn ornaments." I nodded. "Those elements are all part of the value proposition for Legacy residents. Exclusivity and security command premium prices in today's market." My mother was watching me intently, the first traces of understanding crossing her face. "Jay, how do you know all this? Why are we meeting at this company's office?" The moment had come. I straightened in my chair and looked each of them in the eye before responding. "Because I founded Legacy Investment Group. I am the president and majority shareholder. Every property acquisition, every security protocol, every restriction that has been implemented was approved by me." The silence that followed was absolute. Ashley's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Marcus seemed frozen in place. My father removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes, as if trying to clear his vision might change what he was seeing. My mother broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. You did this? Created this whole company? Bought all those properties?" "I did," I confirmed. Shortly after learning about the decision to transfer the family home solely to Ashley, I recognized an opportunity. The neighborhood was poised for significant appreciation due to various development projects in the surrounding areas. By controlling the majority of properties and implementing an exclusive community model, I've managed to increase overall values by 42% in just 6 months. "This is about the house, isn't it?" my father said, his voice hollow with realization. "This is your response to our decision." This is a business strategy, I corrected him, one that has proven remarkably successful. The property you signed over to Ashley and Marcus was worth $900,000 at the time. Based on recent appraisals, similar homes within the enclave are now valued at approximately $2.5 million. Ashley gasped. $2.5 million? Our house is worth that much now? Potentially, I said, allowing a cold smile. But there's a complication. I clicked to the next slide, showing a diagram of the security and access infrastructure surrounding their property. You see, while your house is physically located within the enclave, you are not currently legacy residents. Your property exists as an island within our community. Under the current arrangement, you have limited access to amenities, restricted visitor privileges, and no voice in community decisions. Marcus's face flushed with anger. That's why we've been having all these problems. You've been deliberately making our lives difficult. I've been implementing a consistent community standard, I corrected. The same standards that have increased your potential property value by over $1.5 million. My father was shaking his head slowly, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Jay, why would you do this? Creating this elaborate scheme just because you were upset about the house. I leaned forward, abandoning my professional demeanor for a moment. This isn't about being upset. This is about recognizing value and opportunity, something I learned to do very early in life, when I realized I couldn't count on family support. My mother flinched as if I'd slapped her. We always supported you. You supported my independence, I countered. You pushed me to stand on my own because I was the strong one, while making excuses for Ashley at every turn. So yes, I became strong. I became independent. I learned to recognize opportunities and capitalize on them. That's exactly what I've done here. Ashley's shock was giving way to indignation. So this is revenge? Making it impossible for us to enjoy our home, blocking Mom and Dad from visiting, all because you're jealous that they gave me the house? This isn't revenge, I said calmly. This is business, and now we have a business proposition to discuss. I distributed folders containing my proposal to each of them. As they opened the documents, I continued my presentation. Legacy Investment Group is prepared to purchase your property for $2 million cash. This represents a significant premium over even the enhanced valuation, with no real estate commissions or closing costs deducted. You would be able to purchase a comparable or superior home outside the enclave and still have substantial funds remaining for other purposes. Marcus's eyes widened at the figure. $2 million? Just to buy back the house that was already in the family? The alternative, I continued as if he hadn't spoken, is to continue as you are, a non-member property surrounded by legacy holdings, subject to the access restrictions and community guidelines that have been causing you such frustration. I should note that Phase 3 of our development plan will include additional amenities that will only be available to legacy residents, further isolating non-member properties. This is blackmail, my father said quietly. This is negotiation, I corrected. I'm offering substantially more than market value for the property. The only condition is that the funds must be used responsibly. What does that mean? Ashley demanded. I turned to her directly. It means that before the funds are released, you will need to secure legitimate employment and demonstrate the ability to maintain it for at least 6 months. Marcus will need to do the same. The funds will be held in trust until these conditions are met, with reasonable living expenses provided in the interim. You can't dictate how we live our lives, Ashley protested. I'm not. I'm establishing conditions for a business transaction. You're free to reject the offer and maintain your current situation. Marcus was already flipping to the financial pages, his eyes calculating. My parents sat in stunned silence, the full impact of what I had orchestrated finally becoming clear to them. Why are you doing this to us? My mother finally asked, tears welling in her eyes. We're family. I closed my presentation folder and looked at her steadily. Yes, we are family, and family should help each member become their best self, not enable dependency. Family should recognize effort and sacrifice, not just reward neediness. Family should be fair. We always did what we thought was best, my father insisted weakly. I know, I said, my voice softening slightly. And now I'm doing what I believe is best. Ashley and Marcus need to learn self-sufficiency. The children need to see parents who work and contribute. And you and I need to establish a new understanding of what family truly means. The room fell silent as they absorbed my words and the reality of the situation I had created. The power dynamic that had defined our family for decades had been completely reversed. Now they were the ones facing hard choices with limited options, while I controlled the circumstances. After a long moment, Ashley spoke, her voice uncharacteristically subdued. What about Mom and Dad? Where are they supposed to go if we sell you the house? I had anticipated this question. I have a separate proposal for them. I withdrew another folder and slid it across the table to my parents. Legacy owns a luxury apartment in the new development 3 blocks away. 2 bedrooms, full amenities, maintenance included. It would be transferred to you outright. No mortgage, no property taxes. Your retirement savings would remain untouched. My father opened the folder with trembling hands, examining the photos and details of the apartment. And what do you want from us in return? Recognition, I said simply. Acknowledgement that the way you distributed family resources was fundamentally unfair, and a commitment to treating both your children equitably going forward. My mother's tears were flowing freely now. We never meant to hurt you, Jay. We just always saw you as so capable, so independent. We thought you didn't need us the way Ashley did. Everyone needs to be valued, I replied quietly. Everyone needs to know their contributions matter. The weight of my words settled over the room. For perhaps the first time, they were seeing me clearly, not as the self-sufficient son who needed nothing, but as someone who had been deeply wounded by their lifetime of unequal treatment, someone who had channeled that hurt into creating a position of power they couldn't ignore. We need time to think about this, my father finally said. I nodded and stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Of course. Take a week to consider the proposals. My contact information is in the folders. Whatever you decide, things will change. The only question is how, and on what terms. As they gathered their things to leave, still dazed by the revelations, I remained standing at the head of the table. Ashley paused at the door, turning back to look at me with a complex expression I couldn't quite decipher. Did you plan all of this from the moment they told us about the house? She asked. I considered her question carefully before answering. No. I planned it from the moment I realized that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough to earn equal consideration in their eyes. The house was just the final confirmation. She nodded slowly, a glimmer of understanding passing between us before she followed the others out. As the door closed behind them, I sat back down, feeling neither triumph nor regret, only the quiet certainty that, for the first time in our family's history, my worth could no longer be dismissed or overlooked. The chess game had reached its culmination. Now it was their move. The week following our confrontation passed in complete silence. No calls, no texts, no impromptu visits. I continued my daily routine, dividing my time between my regular job and overseeing Legacy Investment Group's operations. Each evening, I returned to my apartment and waited, knowing they needed time to process everything and come to terms with their new reality. On the 8th day, my phone rang. It was my father, his voice sounding older and more subdued than I had ever heard it. We'd like to talk, he said simply. All of us, but not at your office. Somewhere, neutral. We arranged to meet at a private room in a quiet restaurant downtown. When I arrived, they were already seated. My parents together on one side of the table, Ashley and Marcus opposite them, leaving the head of the table conspicuously empty. It was a small but significant acknowledgement of the shifted power dynamics. My father spoke first after I took my seat. We've discussed your proposals, at length, and we've come to some decisions. He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. My mother placed her hand over his, offering silent support. But before we get to that, he continued, there's something we need to say to you. Something long overdue. He took a deep breath. We're sorry, Jay. Truly sorry. We convinced ourselves that treating you and Ashley differently was about responding to different needs, but we've realized it was unfair at a fundamental level. My mother nodded, tears welling in her eyes. We took your strength for granted. Worse, We essentially penalized you for it. Every time you succeeded on your own, we used it as justification to direct more resources to Ashley. We never stopped to consider how that felt to you. Their words hung in the air between us. For decades, I had waited for this recognition, this acknowledgement. Now that it had come, forced by circumstances rather than freely given, I found my reaction complicated. There was validation, certainly, but also a lingering sadness that it had taken such extreme measures to reach this point. "Thank you for saying that," I finally responded. "It means more than you know." Ashley spoke next, her usual confidence notably diminished. "I've spent my whole life accepting help from Mom and Dad without questioning it. I told myself I deserved it, that I needed it more than you did. I never considered that I was taking something from you, or that I was being enabled rather than truly helped. The past week has been—" Marcus paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Illuminating. Painful, but illuminating. We've had to confront some hard truths about ourselves." My father straightened in his chair. "We've decided to accept your offers, but with some proposed modifications." I nodded, gesturing for him to continue. "For the house, we accept the $2 million purchase price," he said. "And we understand your concerns about Ashley and Marcus's financial responsibility. But rather than holding the entire amount in trust, we propose releasing half immediately to allow them to purchase a new home and establish themselves, with the remainder contingent on meeting employment goals." I considered this for a moment. "That seems reasonable, provided the employment requirement remains firm. Both of you must maintain steady jobs for at least 6 months." Ashley nodded soberly. "I've already applied for 3 positions that match my qualifications. Real positions, not just temporary work. And Marcus has scheduled interviews with 2 design firms." Marcus looked uncomfortable but determined. "I've been coasting for too long, using occasional freelance work as an excuse. It's time I developed a real career." "As for us," my mother continued, "we appreciate the offer of the apartment. It's more than generous, but we have a counter-proposal. Instead of giving it to us outright, we'd like it to be held jointly between you and us. A shared family asset, managed together." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this suggestion. "May I ask why?" "Because we want to start rebuilding trust," my father explained. "Co-owning the apartment would give us a reason to communicate regularly, to make decisions together. We don't want to just accept another asset from another child. We want to create something new with you, something that represents a healthier relationship going forward." Their thoughtfulness caught me off guard. I had expected capitulation or continued resistance, not this genuine attempt to forge a new path. "I think that could work," I agreed. "We could set up a formal co-ownership agreement with defined responsibilities and decision-making protocols." Relief washed over their faces at my acceptance. We spent the next hour discussing practical details, timelines for the house purchase, expectations for Ashley and Marcus's employment search, arrangements for the apartment co-ownership. Throughout the conversation, there was a new tone of respectful consideration that had been absent from our family dynamics for as long as I could remember. As we prepared to leave, Ashley asked if she could speak with me privately. We stepped outside together, while the others settled the bill. "I wanted to ask you something," she said, wrapping her coat tightly around herself in the evening chill. "Why did you smile that day, when they told us about giving me the house? You must have been hurting, but you just smiled." I considered her question carefully. I smiled because in that moment, I realized something important. I realized that all these years, I'd been seeking validation from people who weren't equipped to give it. I'd been measuring my worth by their recognition, when I should have been defining it for myself. "And that made you smile?" "It was liberating," I explained. "Once I accepted that they would never value my achievements the way I needed them to, I was free to take control of the narrative myself." The smile wasn't happiness. It was recognition of my own power to change the situation. Ashley was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "You know, I've been angry with you this past week. Furious, actually. But I'm starting to understand that what you did wasn't really about punishing us. It was about finally being seen. It was about fairness," I corrected gently. about creating consequences for choices that had been consequence-free for too long, about establishing boundaries that had never existed in our family. She nodded slowly. I've never had to work for anything. Not really. Even when I tried, I always knew the safety net was there. I think I've been afraid to truly try and fail. It's never too late to start, I told her. That's the beauty of it. The past doesn't have to define the future. In the months that followed, our family underwent a profound transformation. True to their word, Ashley and Marcus both secured legitimate employment. Ashley discovered an aptitude for event planning and quickly advanced from assistant to coordinator at a corporate events company. Marcus found stability working for a graphic design firm, where his creativity was channeled into productive client work rather than endless unfinished projects. The house transaction proceeded smoothly, and they purchased a modest but comfortable home in a neighboring town, one that reflected their actual means rather than artificial prosperity. The remainder of the funds was invested conservatively to provide for their children's education and future needs. My parents and I established a formal co-ownership agreement for the apartment, meeting monthly to discuss maintenance issues and financial decisions. These meetings gradually expanded to include broader conversations, rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than assumed roles. The most significant change, however, was in how we recognized and celebrated achievements. When Ashley received her first promotion, the entire family gathered to acknowledge her legitimate success. When my parents made a smart decision about apartment renovations that increased its value, I made sure to express genuine appreciation for their insight. The family home, now owned by Legacy Investment Group, was renovated and repurposed as the headquarters for a new initiative, the Legacy Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing business education and startup funding for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. The symbolic transformation of the house from a source of division to a launching pad for others' success felt like the perfect resolution. 1 year after our confrontation at the Legacy offices, we gathered for a family dinner at my parents' apartment. As we shared a meal in their new home, I noticed something remarkable. The conversation flowed without the old undercurrents of favoritism and resentment. Ashley spoke confidently about her work challenges without seeking sympathy or rescue. My parents asked thoughtful questions about both our careers with equal interest. Marcus discussed his creative projects with newfound discipline and purpose. Later, as I helped my mother clear the dishes, she paused and touched my arm gently. I never thought I'd say this, she admitted quietly, but what you did, as shocking as it was at the time, may have been the best thing that could have happened to this family. You forced us all to confront patterns we'd been blind to for decades. I smiled, a genuine smile this time. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most valuable. The thing is, she continued, we always thought we were protecting Ashley by giving her more support, but we were actually preventing her from developing her own strength. And we took your strength so for granted that we never considered how lonely it must have been to always be the one who didn't need anything. Everyone needs something, Mom. Sometimes it's just acknowledgement. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. I see that now. That evening, as I drove home to my own apartment, I reflected on the journey of the past 2 years. What had begun as a response to pain and injustice had evolved into something far more meaningful than mere revenge or rebalancing. It had become a catalyst for growth and healing, not just for me, but for our entire family. I had learned that true independence isn't about not needing others. It's about choosing connection from a place of personal strength rather than dependency. I had discovered that sometimes those we love most need to experience consequences in order to grow. And perhaps most importantly, I had found that forgiveness becomes possible not when the past is erased, but when it leads to a better future. When my parents signed that house over to my sister, leaving me with nothing, I smiled because something in me knew that it wasn't the end of the story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter, one that I would write myself. What would you do if faced with family injustice? Would you walk away, confront it directly, or find a creative solution like I did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding justice in unexpected ways. Remember, sometimes the most powerful response to unfairness isn't anger or acceptance, it's strategic action that creates positive change for everyone involved. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you wisdom and strength in navigating your own family challenges.